Hello, everybody. Happy New Year.
Hello. Okay, it's going.
Happy New Year.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Commissioner Payne,
Yes.
I think on our end, we're ready to go in terms of making sure that we have our recording on and ready to set up. So I'll let you take it over from here.
Perfect. Let me get just one more minute to get all my stuff pulled up here. I was running a second behind myself, and we'll be ready to go in just a moment.
All right.
All right. Everybody here?
Everybody that's here is here.
Yeah, it looks like it, huh? All right, let's go ahead and get started. My name is Mike Payne. I'm the chairman of the Transportation and Mobility Commission. Tonight is the January 5th, 2021 meeting. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Happy New Year's, everyone. I hope everybody had a good holiday season. Tonight's agenda is on the screen here before us. Looks pretty simple, so let's go ahead and get started. Jan, would you mind calling roll, please?
I'm happy to. Commissioner Freyer? Commissioner Freyer? Commissioner Hardy?
Here.
Commissioner Herman?
Here.
Commissioner Jackson? Commissioner Jackson? Commissioner McKenzie?
I think Leah was fumbling with her mute.
Okay. Oh, I see her. Commissioner Jackson?
Here we go. Here.
Great. Commissioner McKenzie? Commissioner Payne?
Present.
Commissioner Rhea?
I'm here.
Commissioner Ramos?
Here.
Commissioner Ruggles?
Here.
Commissioner Valenta?
Here.
Commissioner Williams?
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. So as previously discussed, we will review any excusals at the end of the meeting and vote for any excused absences at that time. At this point, I will go ahead and read the meeting preamble, since I forgot to do that in the last meeting. And wouldn't you know it, I closed it out instead of opening it up. Hold on just a sec. So the role of the Transportation and Mobility Commission is to review and analyze transportation projects, policy changes, program development, and other transportation matters affecting the public right of way. We follow a public process, including voting on action times during which the public has an opportunity to provide additional perspectives and information. In legislative matters, the role of the commission is advisory. The Planning Commission may hold separate meetings to consider our recommendations and provide their own. And City Council may also hold separate meetings to consider our recommendation and make a final determination. The Transportation and Mobility Commission will conduct a meeting tonight and take public comments during designated times. Any written testimony received by 4 p.m. will be read into the record by staff. I believe we may have time to do that tonight based on the limited letters communication. Any written testimony, okay, callers who have pre-registered by 4 p.m. on the Transportation and Mobility Commission survey page will be called upon to address the Transportation and Mobility Commission. When you are called, we will promote you to a panelist so members can see and hear you as you provide comments. If you are providing the formal recommendation of a neighborhood association or any other group, please tell us when that association voted on the matter, as well as how many people were for and against it. Please keep remarks brief and to the point. Remarks should be directed to the Transportation and Mobility Commission as a body, not the audience or the staff. Please do not repeat comments that have already been provided in print or verbally. And please show respect for the people commenting tonight, whether or not you agree with their comments. With that said, the next topic on our agenda is to adopt the minutes from our December meeting. Those were sent out earlier. Has everyone had a chance to review those?
When were they sent?
Jen, do you have that date handy?
I think they were sent Thursday.
Yeah.
December 31st.
Yes, it was along with the agenda and the PowerPoint for the transportation system plan.
So I see an email on December 30th, but I do not see an attachment. So I have one, I don't have the minutes.
Go ahead.
Do you have the chain of emails where Daria sent out the link to the
TED Talk.
TED Talk?
On the 5th? Oh, it got buried.
Scroll down
I
and
see it
yeah,
now. Thank
Yep.
you. It got buried in the email chain.
Yes.
Sorry about that.
yeah, that's what.
I totally missed that.
Well,
It's a pretty quick read.
and if you'd like to take a look at it real quick, has anybody else had a chance to not read it that needs to look at it real quick?
It looks like there's somebody that, oh, okay, Jan found her.
So Commissioner Payne, maybe while everybody are, while one of our members is taking a look at that, the rest of us can look at this citizen communication if we didn't get a chance. Is that okay? We
That
have
would be
one
awesome.
that Jan sent us.
Please do.
I
If you
was
have a
not
chance.
present in this meeting, so I have no way of, I'll have to rely on you guys. So go ahead and vote. Don't wait on me for this.
Well,
Make a motion that we adopt the minutes as handed out to us.
Williams, second.
okay, we have a motion to approve. Shall we take roll, please?
Excuse me. Commissioner Hardy, excuse me.
Aye.
Commissioner Jackson,
Aye.
Commissioner McKenzie,
Aye.
Commissioner Payne,
Aye.
Commissioner Rhea,
Yes.
Commissioner Ramos,
Aye.
Commissioner Ruggles,
Aye.
Commissioner Valenta,
Aye.
Commissioner Williams,
Aye.
Commissioner Herman.
Aye.
So Commissioner Payne, I have a question.
Go ahead.
You mentioned in your opening remarks that our citizen communications will be read into the record by staff. Does that mean they will audibly read it for us? How does that work? Jan, do you know?
I'll address that to the city, please. I know we discussed that last week. Due to the amount of letters that we had, the communication, we chose not to last week. Is that going to be standard going forward, or how do we wish to proceed with that?
Do we have David with us?
David, could you respond to that, please?
Please, Dave.
Yes, absolutely. I'm sorry, could you repeat it one more time for me?
On the citizen communications that are sent in via email, last week we chose not to read those into record due to the amount of letters that we had received. Is that going to be process going forward? I don't recall if we had determined that.
So my answer to that would be for communications that are received in advance of the meeting, if all members have had a chance to read through them, you can just move to accept those communications as part of the record. You don't need to read them out. If it's something where it is in a different scenario brought to the meeting and read out at that time, or somebody hands a piece of paper but does not wish to read it themselves, one option is to have it read into the record. But if you've all received it in advance, then you can just move to accept it as part of the record.
Thank you. And I would propose that we do that tonight. We will just, to answer your question, Commissioner, we will just have those available as a matter of record as the attachment to the minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you for clarifying that, David. So with that said, moving forward with our agenda, looks like we are at the informational item for this evening. I will turn this back over to the city for further information.
Hi, sorry, I'm on my computer monitors here at my office for the first time in a year, and I've apparently forgotten how to use my mouse. So today we're going to talk about the transportation system plan updates. My name is Anna Dearman. I'm using Jennifer Compass's Zoom account, so please ignore the name on the screen. I'm Jennifer's colleague. So tonight, our consultant for the transportation system plan update will be sharing kind of an overview of this effort. You've heard us reference it in some of the onboarding, as well as just some of the explanation of your work program and what you will be encountering this year, 2021, your first year of work, and then this will actually be an ongoing project. So you may remember from sort of the orientation that the transportation system plan is essentially the transportation element of the city's comprehensive plan. And so this is really the foundation of transportation projects, plans, programs, policy in the city, and really everything else that we do around transportation in the city stems from this plan. And so It lays out a vision for the next 20 or so years of our city's transportation system. So that's the street network, but it's also things like travel demand management, for example, things that may not have kind of an infrastructure, sort of a concrete component. And so we just began this effort really in late 2019. And then it'll be, again, a multi-year effort. And it's, experienced some pivoting due to COVID, just as all of our transportation work, all of our lives have. But I'll kick it off to Nelson Nygaard, our consultant to project managers, Tom Brennan and Stephanie Ryder here to talk about the transportation system plan update, and I'll let them kind of dive deep, and then hopefully there'll be time for questions. This is the first of many times you will likely see the transportation system plan as part of your work, especially this year and next, and then potentially even into 2023. So with that, I will kick it over to Nelson Nygaard.
Thanks, Anna. Hi, everyone. My name is Tom Brennan, and I work for Nelson Nygaard. As Anna said, we're leading up a team of folks working on this important project for the city of Vancouver. Stephanie Wright is also here with me today and will be helping present some of the information. So we've heard a lot about this group. We're glad you're off and running and looking forward to having a number of touch points with you to talk about this project over the coming year and a half or so. We do have a presentation, and looks like Jan has that up. So Jan, are you going to run the show, and we'll just kind of tell you when to advance? Is that the game plan?
Yeah, if that works for you. Otherwise, I can try to turn it over to you. Either way.
If it's not too hard to turn it over, that might be a little less clunky, but we can work with either one.
Okay, I think the clunky part might be me figuring out how to do that. Okay. But
if it's trouble and everyone doesn't mind us saying next slide, then let's just roll.
I'm gonna actually. I think I might be able to do that. Thomas, let's see if it'll work.
Okay.
Okay. So if I do that, do you have access to the screen now?
It says I'm the host. Let's see. Stop participant sharing. See if I can share my own screen now. This might just be working. See, can folks see the screen now? No.
Not yet. No.
All right.
Okay, now it's up.
It's up?
Yep.
Okay. You get into presentation mode here. Are we live? Excellent. Well, thanks. I know we've got a lot of time on your agenda tonight here, so we really hope to make this a dialogue. We're still fairly early in the process, so it's a great time for us to start hearing from you and hopefully share a little bit about what we're doing. So we'll introduce the project, just building a little bit on what Anna just shared with us. We're going to be kind of talking about really some of the work we've been doing, sort of assessing mobility and transportation in Vancouver to date. We're showing you a lot of maps and data analysis that we've done. I think a big hope for us is, you guys are the ones who live and work and operate businesses in Vancouver. So, we're hoping to hear from you how some of this information resonates. If you see things that are surprising or want to call out and question us, please do. And we'll wrap up just talking a little bit about some of the community outreach that we're engaged in right now, and hopefully encouraging you and others that in the city to get involved. So as Anna mentioned, the state of Washington has what they call the Growth Management Act, which is essentially some state regulations that require cities to plan ahead for their capital facilities, and that includes transportation systems.
Hey, Tom.
Yeah.
Tom, sorry, but you're still seeing the regular
Oh.
views. It's not in present. You might be showing a different screen.
I think what happened is I switched to presentation mode and it went to a different screen. Good Lord. See if this works.
There you go. Good.
So you're seeing the comprehensive plan, misspelled slide?
Yeah.
Okay. So again, as I was saying, the Growth Management Act requires that the City of Vancouver keep up to date and really plan 20 years ahead for land use and supporting infrastructure. And a key part of that supporting infrastructure is obviously your transportation systems. So you have a comprehensive plan that really looks at how the community will grow. This map here kind of illustrates some of your key growth centers and corridors, the places the city expect growth in business, in industry, in residential population to occur most intensively within the city. And then that comprehensive plan is required to have a transportation element. So the work that we're doing now on the transportation system plan is extensive update to your existing transportation system plan. You may or may not know that Vancouver has an active transportation system plan that was developed in 2004. Which was a really excellent and forward-thinking document at the time, but obviously many things have changed since 2004, including the size and shape of your community, as well as a lot of things in the transportation industry. So the time is ripe for this update, and the project we're engaged in is doing just that. One of the things that we took on early in this project was coming up with a brand for the project. Essentially, is there a way that we can talk about this project with a little catchier name? So the TSP update is also being talked about as the Vancouver Moves plan, really stressing that this plan has importance in guiding really all elements of our transportation, our street network, how that's used by freight, by personal vehicles, by bikes, pedestrians, transit, and looking at how we manage our technology, our signal infrastructure. There's a lot of new advancements in the transportation industry that could be fruitful in helping make the transportation system safer and more effective for people. So really be looking at all aspects of the transportation system. As Anna mentioned, we kicked off late last year, and really those first couple of months were just kind of about mobilizing the project, getting a scope of work and outreach plan in place. We did some of that project branding, set up a website. I know we would have met with all of you much earlier had we not had a pandemic. We had, as of March 2020, really just started some of our initial work in kind of what we call baselining the project, or understanding what the existing conditions are for people who move around in the city and goods that move around in the city. And as March 2020 hit, many things went on hold, including our project. And so we were really kind of laid low and didn't make any progress through the spring. As of the summer, we kind of re-engaged some of that technical work in some of that project baselining, kind of understanding the existing conditions, but didn't until fall really begin to conduct some of the engagement with the community, and that's going to continue to be somewhat of a slower process, as we're obviously quite constrained in how we engage community members. It has to be virtual at this point, but we are re-engaged now. We did some initial outreach, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like at the end of the process. As we move into 2021, some key tasks we'll be working on are really setting a vision and goals for transportation in Vancouver. So, as you think about needs of the system, please, please keep in mind, we're looking for your input and others on what an effective transportation system looks like. We're also, working with the city to ensure that we're considering all populations that live and work in Vancouver as part of this project. As we move into the spring, that's really kind of when we get to the exciting part of this project, and in developing transportation solutions, projects, programs, policies that respond to those goals and needs. And there'll be another big outreach push in the springtime, likely virtual, but we'll see how fast we can get this vaccine rolled out. But that'll be a key point where we're really getting input on some of the big ideas that come out of that planning work. And will certainly be a key milestone for engaging this group to get your feedback. Then as we move into the later part of next year, we'll start to get into some of the supporting details around funding. How can we fund these, the elements of the transportation system plan? Some specific work on updating street standards. So those are really the standards that the city uses as they either build new streets or potentially rebuild existing streets to make sure those are up to modern safety standards and meet the functionalities that align with the plan. And then monitoring tools, and that's really, looking at how we measure success of the TSP. So, as we set goals, we want to make sure that those are measurable over time, so we can track the success of the plan. And then as we move into the earlier part of 2022, probably through the spring of 2022, we'll really go into the adoption process. And this is, this is a process where we'll develop a draft plan for pretty broad review. We'll have outreach and public comment at that point, and multiple meetings with this group, with the Planning Commission, as well as the City Council, to work through a draft and final plan process before adoption. So that's a little bit about our schedule. In terms of sort of how the input into this project is being conducted, obviously it's the City Council that will ultimately adopt this plan with recommendation from the Planning Commission. We're working with a broad set of city staff across planning, engineering, communications throughout the project. And then we really have two key advisory bodies that will be helping us review this work and channel stakeholder and community input into our process as well. That includes all of you as the Transportation Mobility Commission, and we also have a technical advisory committee that is set up, and we will meet with at regular milestones. That involves partner agency, so that's staff from organizations like CTRAN and some of your neighboring communities. That's a little bit about the process. Any questions about kind of what the TSP update is, our schedule, or anything else before we dive into talking about some of our observations about the system and hopefully having some good discussion with all of you? And you can all feel free to either raise your hand or just jump in and shout at me at any point during this conversation. All right, excellent. Oh, is there a question there?
No, go ahead. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we want to talk a little bit about some of the work that we've been doing. The transportation in any city is in many ways kind of the lifeblood of how people interact with the community and how the economy functions. And a lot of the detail around that can get pretty wonky and maybe pretty boring for a lot of a lot of people in the general public. So one of the things we often try to do at the outset of these projects is to develop a document that's succinct and public friendly, fairly graphically oriented, that really sort of lays out some of the key functions and influences on transportation in your community. And we call this the State of the Mobility document. This is a pretty succinct and short document, and we'll just kind of run through a few of the things that this document talks about. This will be kind of backing for some of our public conversations as we communicate with folks across the community as to where we're starting from as we engage in this effort. So, I think one of the things that's really critical as we start this project is talking to people about why transportation matters. And one of the things we find as we work across communities is transportation means a lot of different things to different people who live in different neighborhoods, who have different types of work or schooling, who have different mobility needs. And so, it's a complex task to take on developing a plan that works effectively and safely for everybody. But we do like to recognize that almost everybody in any community utilizes the transportation system, and most people utilize it for many different things, from recreation to errands to working. And it's also really critical to keeping our communities functioning, our businesses, our retail businesses, our industry. So a lot of competing needs, and part of this work is really providing the guidance for what's often a lot of key trade-off decisions about how we use the limited space and limited money we have to provide for all those needs. Anytime we engage in a transportation plan, we also try to recognize that transportation is not an end in and of itself. It's something that serves people's needs and works to help meet the values of the community. So we like to spend some time getting to know the community, how it's growing, and what it values. And so as we get into next year, that question around what the community values will really be a key piece of our discussion. But just some things we note is that Vancouver is obviously a rapidly growing community, and has been over the last decade. The communities that surround it are also growing quickly. Clark County is growing, as is the whole region. Vancouver is diversifying. 20% of your fellow residents are Black, Indigenous, or people of color. So that's up from 17% in 2010. You've got a really excellent school system and a very tightly knit community that's proud of its livability, and certainly transportation is a key part of that. Vancouver is also urbanizing and becoming more of a destination. You've got a number of new hotels planned and a really impressive new development on the downtown riverfront. It's also becoming a more expensive place to live, as is the case throughout much of the metro region. So, all those things can influence how we think about transportation. I'll pause. Mari, you have a question?
So going back to that previous slide, when are these statistics gathered as of? Like last year, sometime in 2020, or is it
These are generally 2018 or 2019 statistics.
Thank you.
You're welcome. One of the things that is really important to us as planners when we think about transportation system is kind of the density or concentration of where people work and live. So we spent some time sort of mapping here what we call population density. And here the darker colors represent where there's more concentrated residential living, generally where you've got more apartments or smaller lot type development. One of the things that's kind of interesting about Vancouver is typically when we do this sort of mapping in most communities, there's a pretty significant density around your downtown area. In Vancouver, your density is actually a bit more spread out across the community. So that's something that we look at when we think about transportation needs. One of the things that we find with population density is that people are generally more likely to use non-auto modes for some of their trips, at least when they live in denser parts of a community. We took a look at working in Vancouver, what your employment looks like. So this is important. This is a quick summary of the job base in Vancouver, strong in healthcare and manufacturing and retail. Obviously, accommodation and food service being big. We'll certainly hope that that comes back. These are pre-pandemic numbers. As we again think about this, we're looking at where the city's growing. Obviously, a lot of densification along the waterfront, which involves both commercial and residential uses. Also noted that the Port of Vancouver is an important employer and has a strong influence on overall number of jobs and job growth in the last decade. So again, we often like to look at the density of where those jobs are as well, because where people need to get to work, at least outside this pandemic world where a lot of us work at home, but we know many people are still going to work these days at hospitals, at retail locations, at other essential services. This density of employment is also a big driver of how we plan for transportation. So again, this map looks a little bit different, more concentration in the downtown. Obviously, a lot of employment density along the Fourth Plain corridor, really along a good portion of that corridor, including around Van Mall, as well as some higher density out of the Columbia Tech Center and points east of 205. And this is just a quick map that actually combines the two. So when we put together employment and population density, as you can see here in this little block, the darker colors is the place where there's a strong mix of both types. Again, this sort of shows us where are the most people traveling to and from each day. So again, some important patterns as we start to think about need. And one of the things that we'll be doing in this process is looking at how these growth or these areas of density are expected to change over time. One of the things we wanted to know is
a question. Go back to those maps. Have you ever made any thoughts to having another overlay of, I don't know, average income or some socioeconomic measures?
Yeah, that's a great question, and absolutely. We're not going to talk a lot about it in our conversation tonight, but some of the work that we're doing and are working with city staff on are looking at a number of demographic factors that kind of help us understand the needs of the community. So that would include where we have concentrations of lower income residents, where there might be concentrations of lower wage jobs, where there are high percentages of people of color, and we tend to look at things like low car ownership locations. Again, that might suggest that people have different types of mobility needs if there's more households that have zero cars in an area. So those are all types of things that we look at. Leah, you have a question?
Yes, and I was going to say it might also be interesting if you could do 5 years, well, say 10 years ago versus now, just to see the change in those demographics, because that would also show that some of the transportation changes it feels like I've seen looking at your other slides.
Yeah.
That was a recommendation at our last TMC meeting. One of the speakers suggested that and also was in a letter that we look through the lens of equity and have an equity map. So I think that's a concern of the public also.
Great. Yeah, I know our team and the city team are developing some what I think will be really excellent data tools to overlay some of those equity factors on our work, and I'm certain that we'll bring those back to you at a future meeting. So I really appreciate that input.
And Tom, one other thing, since equity was one of the things I wanted to bring up. Thank you, Teresa. And the other thing is how much are we looking through the lens of also besides equity and climate change? Are we being informed by environmental concerns like that? Excuse me.
Yeah, absolutely. That will be a key part of our work, and what I understand from Jennifer and Anna, the city is actually engaged in doing some baselining work right now to understand the emissions profile of the community, and transportation will be part of that. So that will serve as, as kind of a comparable baseline to what we're talking about here for some of the transportation elements. And that will be one of the lenses that, as we review projects and policies, that we'll be looking at for sure. So another thing that we want to look at is sort of how people get around today, or what we in the business call mode share. And this is largely focused on commute trips, not all trips. But you can see the majority of people still get to work by driving alone. About 80, almost over 85% of folks. One of the interesting trends that we were seeing even before COVID was that there was an increase in the number of people working at home. I think that was a trend we're seeing in our services-oriented economy even before COVID hit. We certainly expect, as people are able to get back to work, that probably will stay much higher than pre-pandemic. About 3% of people commuted by transit, about 2% by walking, and still under 1% by bicycle. And the average commute time in the city was 23, almost 24 minutes. We also looked at commute patterns, so where people are traveling to and from. We found that about a third of commuters in Vancouver both lived and went to work at a job in the city. So that means about 2/3 either live or work outside the city. And you can see here, obviously, the strongest pattern of people commuting out of Vancouver is going to Portland, about 22%. Portland's also the biggest in commute, although, as you can see from these orange arrows, pretty consistent. About 3% of people who work in Vancouver commuting from some of your adjacent communities, places like Camas, Battlegrounds, Orchards, Five Corners. So a lot of commute activity in and out of the city. I won't touch on this extensively, but part of what we did in this document as well is sort of document some of the key facts about our transportation systems. How many miles of streets do we have with sidewalk? How many miles of bike lanes? What's the use of the transit system? How many ped and bike crashes do we have? That's a key piece of our analysis, is looking at making the system safer.
I just wanted to throw, could we flip back to the previous slide?
Yeah, sure.
Post-COVID, I think a lot of people have gotten used to working from home now. And so I think there's going to be a decisive shift between people that commute to the office and people that work out of their home. At least I think people generally like working from home. Mm-hmm. Have you put any thought into how that will change? I mean, your previous slide before this one was showing a very small percentage from what we're probably experiencing right now in terms of people that are working from home. I guess you said 6.2% are working from home.
That was pre-COVID.
Yeah, I get that. Yeah. So I think there's going to be, I've got to think that there's going to be a permanent change there. I mean, I don't know how many, I don't know if that's 30% or 20% or 50%. It's a much larger percentage than 6.2% currently. And I would suggest that that's going to be, even though there will be some migration back into the office, into the workplace, that will be a fairly permanent change, I think.
Yeah, we think so too. And it's, there's a lot of speculation in the transportation industry right now about how that will play out. I think the, general consensus is that certain types of jobs will quickly go back, service-oriented jobs, obviously restaurants where there's direct interaction with clients, those types of jobs, manufacturing jobs, all those jobs, those are going to have to go back. The white collar in an office desk job where people have learned they can work pretty much anywhere. I think a lot of those jobs are going to be much slower. So what does that mean for the transportation system? Well, it probably means, center cities may take, who knows how long, but years to kind of get back to their prominence in terms of generating a real peaked commute.
Not only that, but there's a reverberating effect. If people are working from home, they want to get out and do something. They don't want to sit in the house.
Mm-hmm.
So they're going to be accessing goods and services differently than they're probably doing now. And I think that has an effect as well on these numbers.
I think you're absolutely right. More people, more people are in the neighborhood during the day. So, they're not going to a restaurant downtown. They're going to a restaurant in their neighborhood. So you're absolutely right. There's a lot of reverberating effects, and that's something that we've started to look at. We have a little bit of data that we'll share with you tonight, but it's something we'll continue to talk about during this project extensively.
So Tom, I have a question as well with regard, with Mario speaking about these interesting changes. It makes me wonder. I'm not sure what the term is. I'm sure you know what it is. Induced use or induced something.
Demand.
Induced demand. Thank you. So I'm wondering if you took any examples of cities that have made the changes that address induced demand, like Mario's very good point that we have this external change come upon us in terms of creating something that is more human-centric instead of auto-centric. Besides Copenhagen, I mean.
Right. Yeah, I mean we've worked in a lot of cities across the U.S. where we've worked on projects where we've repurposed street space for cycling, for transit, for pedestrians. And there is also, there's actually something called Bray's paradox, which is sort of the mathematical foundation of induced demand. That's getting a little bit wonky, but the idea of induced demand, for those who don't know, is essentially if you put the space out there for vehicles, it will get filled up, and has been shown time and time again that when you widen a highway, a very crowded, a very congested highway, within a year, it's again congested because you've enabled people to make different choices.
So in other words, if you build it, they will come, right?
Right.
Exactly.
But we've also seen plenty of cases of if you reduce it, they will change their behavior. And actually as a firm, we worked on some highway removal projects where cities have completely taken out freeways. And it's interesting to see how people adapt. People do things differently.
Isn't it true that when you start adding like safe boundaries and water and trees, and people also start to feel safe and relate and move in completely different ways?
Right. So yeah, great point. That's something I'm sure we'll have plenty of time to talk more about. All right, I'll keep moving here since we're probably a little bit behind time. Just wrapping up this section, there's a lot of other types of mobility services that are becoming more and more popular. Uber and Lyft, certainly ride-hailing services that you have. A lot of cities are starting to develop mobility hubs where shared mobility, cycling, transit, ride-hailing can all come together. a lot of cities are really starting to use more advanced technology to manage their systems and provide broader mobility options. So these are things that we'll have time to talk more about as we move through this plan.
Are you guys also going to address alternative transportation vehicles, like not just bicycles, but neighborhood electric vehicles and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, this is a great a great plan to talk about vehicle electrification. Other types of, I don't know if you're talking about like neighborhood circulators that
Basically,
operate with electric
golf carts that are fancy golf carts that are going to be on the streets.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, autonomous vehicles is another thing that we'll certainly be seeing more of in the time frame of this plan.
Yeah.
So before we move on, we just want to stop and pause and ask all of you: are there other things you see happening in the community that influence how we plan for transportation over the next 20 years, either from a land use standpoint, demographic standpoint, work pattern standpoint, as Mara brought up? Who's got their hand up? Leah?
So in kind of thinking along what Mario brought up as well, I'm sitting in a downtown where there's a lot of vacant office space at the moment, and I'm assuming that that's probably going to be an ongoing trend. So figuring that the downtown is going to be emptier until we change how we look at those buildings.
Mhm.
So, I mean, it's a broader question in that we probably need to change them into residences, but get people of all means living downtown.
Right. Good point. Thank you. Mario?
Oh, sorry.
You have your hand up still, or you didn't mean to? Okay.
I raised it earlier. I forgot
Oh,
to lower it. Sorry.
I've got mine raised again though. And I think of when you were looking at the demographic changes, and I think about COVID and the fact that right now, much of the outreach that you mentioned is online. There's a large population, a large demographic that we're not going to be able to connect to if it's just online. So I think of, when I think of inclusion, and I think about changing demographics, I think that's an important area to consider.
Yeah, that's great. And we are, we're not going to talk a lot right now about engagement, but we are working with a number of community-based organizations to help ensure that we're able to get to some of those harder to reach populations, second language populations. But thank you for that. Matt, I see your hand up there.
So one of the aspects, as you guys probably know, is the battle for curb space, whether Uber comes, or Uber and Lyft, as well as balancing that with those drop-off locations with parking demands and other bicycle infrastructure as well. So that curb space is really going to be important to plan for the future and the way we move in the next coming generations.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about that. I was certainly doing a lot of work around curb space management and prioritization, even pre-COVID. I think with the COVID's boost to the internet economy, it's becoming an even more important issue quickly. Thanks for that. Anybody else?
Yeah, just kind of final flogging on the demographics. One thing I didn't hear explicitly was looking at kind of the average age in the city. Like my folks no longer are driving because they're of that age. And that's, not quite sure how they're, haven't been able to check up on them.
Right. Yeah, that's something we always look at, understanding that seniors at some point age out of driving and have other need for other mobility services. Leah, did you have your hand up? Was that from before? Okay. All right. Is it Daria? Is that
Yes,
how I pronounce
yes.
it? Okay.
somebody else brought it up and and it's the obvious thing, but it was in the chat box and I just want to give them full credit and bring it up, which is the bridge, obviously for the future. Yeah.
Great.
I-5 bridge.
When you say the bridge, we know what you mean.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we want to dive into kind of some of the more mode or area specific work that we've done. Some of this is a little bit detailed, but we'll try to make it accessible and move through so we have time for conversation. Seems like a group who's willing to just raise your hand and jump in. So please continue to do that if you have questions. Some of the things we're looking at in this plan are the systems that you have in place and infrastructure you have for cycling, for walking, and how those how some of the information we have about safety reflects on people's ability and willingness to do those things. So starting with cycling, this is a map of the city's bicycle network, and you've got a number of different types of facilities, from paths that are fully separated to on-street bike lanes, to streets that are just kind of lower traffic shared roadways. We don't expect you to memorize this, but I think one of the things that really pops out at us as we look at this as transportation planners, when you look at some of the key places where people live and would need to go to work or to school, you start to see from this map that there's not a lot of really kind of consistent facilities. Someone traveling from an eastern neighborhood to downtown probably has to get on a number of different streets and a number of different types of facilities with different sort of levels of comfort and safety. And we know when it comes to getting more people on bikes that really having a protected and connected network where people can have a comfortable ride from start to finish makes a big difference. So the cities, put a fair amount of effort into building out facilities, but the system is somewhat sporadic and disconnected, and that's somewhat amplified by the fact that your overall street network has a lot of zigs and zags as you move through the city due to topography and freeways and other things. So that's kind of one major observation. As we think about cycling in a city, we know that there's really lots of different types of cyclists with different levels of comfort and who travel differently on bicycles. And when we think about building a system or designing facilities, we kind of talk about the 8 to 80 user group. So we really want to build facilities where an 8-year-old is comfortable riding with their parents or potentially by themselves, and an older person who may not be as intrepid on a bike still feels comfortable getting out and taking a ride for pleasure or to go to the store. And these are some of those facility types that we saw from the top off-street path or trail where there's kind of full separation. You're not interacting with traffic other than maybe crossing a street, down to a bike route or shared lane. That's sort of a lower level of separation and lower level of comfort as well. So we're thinking about those things as we think about the transportation system. In the biz, we have something we call bicycling level of traffic stress, which I won't go into a ton of detail about, but it's kind of a way to think about, put a bunch of different factors in place: speed, separation, and kind of rate roadways on how comfortable it would be to ride a bike there. And the rating is sort of 1 to 4, 4 being the least comfortable, 1 being the most comfortable. And so just have a couple examples here. This is Southeast Evergreen Highway, which we know is a street a lot of more intrepid bikers, road bikers ride on, but it's a very narrow street and it has no facilities. It does have some speed humps, but they're pretty far separated and people can really get up their speed between them. So it's probably not somewhere you're going to take your 8-year-olds to go for a ride. This is an example of Southeast 192nd, where you actually see there is a bike lane here, but it's still based on the traffic level of stress due to the speed and volume of traffic and the level of separation. And you can see here a bicycle has to cross a major merge pattern. It's a place where there is a facility, but for a less confident bicyclist, probably not a great place to ride. This is another type of facility. Pretty standard narrow bike lane next to 2 lanes of traffic on a higher speed road. Again, an example where there's a facility in place, but probably not one that everyone's comfortable using. This is another example of a level 3, so a little bit better. It's just generally a neighborhood street, so there's not actually a facility here, but based on this analysis, it's a lower speed, lower volume road, so probably a little bit more comfortable than even riding in a bike lane on a major arterial. And then this is an example of a very narrow merge street in downtown where traffic has to travel slow because cars may actually need to slow down and or stop to pass oncoming traffic. So probably a fairly comfortable place for cycling. That's a little bit about some of the work that we're doing on the cycling system as a baseline. We've also taken some data from an inventory the city did and mapped out the kind of sidewalk connectivity. Sidewalk connectivity is really important because it helps us to understand people's willingness to take walk trips, and those walk trips often link to other types of trips. We certainly know that the success of your transit system is greatly driven by people's ability to get to the bus stops. If folks don't feel that it's safe for themselves, for their kid to walk to the bus stop, they're probably much less likely to use the bus and more likely to get in the car for that type of trip. What we see here is that the red spots are places on major streets, or what we call arterial streets, where there's either no sidewalk on one or both sides of the street. In the orange is what we call collector streets. Those are kind of medium streets that feed into the major streets, and then the yellow are the arterial or the local streets, kind of neighborhood subdivision streets where there's one or both sides of the roadway that doesn't have a sidewalk. Now, one thing that's kind of problematic about this data is that it looked at sidewalk gaps for one or both sides of the street. Now, there's a big difference in a residential subdivision, whether you have a sidewalk on one side of the street or no sides of the street. And as we kind of look at your land use patterns here, I think one of the trends we see is that on the kind of far east side, some of the newer subdivisions, those were built with requirements for sidewalks on both sides of the street. Some of the older subdivisions that are east of 205, a number of those were built with no sidewalks. We generally kept wider streets, but no sidewalks at all. And then a lot of the subdivisions, kind of older subdivisions, say along Mill Plain, south of Mill Plain, along MacArthur there, many of those were built under the standard of one side of the street having a sidewalk. So just to point out that all yellow lines on this map are not quite equal. But this is important data and context for us to be looking at. Another thing we look at.
Before you go on, question about the, I don't know if there's some way of slicing the data to show where schools are. What are the sidewalk gaps within half mile, 1 mile radius, whatever. And looking down again, arterial, collector, local. That might, I don't know, just another idea.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, Ken, and that is something that we will do as we get into this process. Right now, we're just kind of documenting the existing conditions. But one of the things we know from working in cities like Vancouver is if you made it a capital priority to, for every street to have a sidewalk on both sides, you would spend your next 50 years of transportation budget just building sidewalks, because sidewalks are really expensive. So we'll need to be really careful in where we make those prioritizations. And so we'll typically go through a process that looks at, where are they most needed? So that includes things like, providing critical access to schools, right? Critical access to services, to retail, to transit stops. So that's some of the process that we'll get into as we move into the spring and start to do some project prioritization.
I know sidewalks are very expensive, but are there other options? I mean, paint and removing parking?
Yes, and there's, I mean, one of the things we've seen during COVID is a lot of cities experimenting with reprioritizing street space for pedestrians, either through kind of local access programs where it's very limited auto access, or
That seems like a faster way to address some of the problem areas where it would be very expensive otherwise.
yeah, and so those types of lower cost programs are definitely things that we can look at in this process. This map illustrates for us another thing that's really important in terms of pedestrian access and safety, and that is how far do you have, if you're on a street with traffic, how far do you have to go in order to cross that street with a either a signalized intersection or a pedestrian crossing. One of the things we know is that people aren't inclined to walk too far, and if they don't have a safe facility, they might be more likely to dart across the street, which can lead to traffic injuries. So just to digest this quickly, the darker lines here are generally places where people would have to go a little longer distance in order to find a protected crossing. One of the things that we're doing right now is
sorry to intervene. Can you also address kind of sidewalks and the need to build them to standards applicable to the ADA, and how we can't really put people into the street because they might have impairments that visual impairments where they can't just travel in the street?
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously a key priority for the city, and a requirement of the American with Disabilities Act is to provide facilities that are ADA accessible. So obviously in older cities or cities that have older areas, there were facilities built or maybe built in county land and annexed prior to that aren't up to ADA standards, but certainly anything that the city builds moving forward would be ADA accessible. So another thing that we're doing some work on right now is evaluating collisions throughout the city, and we're actually kind of building a neat tool to help us and other folks within the city to evaluate where collisions are happening and hopefully prevent those in the future. We don't have that dashboard for tonight, but I'm sure you'll get a chance to see it in the future. So we're looking at that both in terms of all collisions over the 2010 to 2019 period, as well as specifically looking at bicyclist involved and pedestrian involved collisions, as we know those to be generally more significant in terms of injuries and fatalities. A couple, there are some certainly disturbing trends here, and that crashes grew 29% over that period. So we're seeing, still seeing an alarming amount of crashes, and it's obviously a priority of the city to reduce that and bring that as close to zero as possible. This is just a mapping of the crashes by mode. So the green are the pedestrian involved crashes, orange are bicycle involved crashes, and the blue dots are vehicle only, so single or multiple vehicle crashes. A few things that certainly pop out here is that the freeway interchanges are sort of high vehicle collision locations, particularly along sort of Fourth Lane and Evergreen Highway, as well as in the downtown area. Some of the, major east-west arterial streets, including Mill Plain and Fourth Plain, have sort of the highest rate of overall crashes. And you can see from kind of the coloring of those lines, a number of bicycle and pedestrian crashes on those roadways. And then generally in the downtown, probably not surprisingly, as there's more cyclists and pedestrians in the downtown, there's a sort of higher rate of bicycle and ped crashes there. We've also been spending some time looking at what the kind of key contributing factors are. This comes from data collected by the police who respond to these accidents or crashes, excuse me. And generally sort of across all modes, distraction or inattention is a high contributing factor, as is unsafe speed. I think one of the somewhat disturbing trends we've seen during the lower traffic periods of the pandemic is that people have been driving faster. So that's catching pedestrians and cyclists off guard, and also contributes to more severe accidents when vehicles are moving more quickly.
I just want to throw in a comment about how much of this shows that the cyclists or pedestrians are distracted or not granting right of way. Just given the number of serious injuries and fatalities, they may not even be able to respond to what they were doing. And if anybody's ever seen a police report, I think they get to fill in a lot of their information for them, just having been involved.
Yeah, that is true. So this works with the best data we have, but as you mentioned, in the worst of situations, key informants may not be available to contribute to that data. So that's a little bit about walking and cycling. I think we had a few questions. I would love to hear from the group as to, are there areas of the community or aspects of the transportation system that you think prevent people from walking and cycling when maybe they would choose to make that trip if conditions were different? Go ahead, Leah.
I was just going to say, I think you have a graph coming up that has the decline in cycling. And it's actually, I'm going to address it here with preventing people from walking and cycling. I opened my business in 2010. At that time, I had 5 employees. Every one of them walked or bicycled to work. Now, none of them can afford to live as close enough to feel comfortable biking or walking to work. So I do believe that has something to do with it.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, it's certainly a trend we're seeing both with transit ridership as well as cycling in places like Vancouver. I know Portland has experienced this as well. I mean, it used to be that inner Southeast Portland was the cheap place to live, and then as gentrification happened, a lot more people moved out to the suburbs or the Far East Side, and we're no longer able to choose to bike or use transit. So that's a great point.
A couple of points. One of the things I know a lot of people I talk to were very envious of me. I was able to commute on a bicycle because my employer has a shower.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people go, I'm not going to ride 5 miles in the morning and be all sweaty and gross the whole dang day long. Mm-hmm. Another thing on pedestrian stuff, I think there's, when I walk around, I am startled at how often pedestrian call buttons don't work. And then you are faced with having to jaywalk or go a long way out of your way to make it across an intersection. So a lot of the things, the bias of the system is that you have to, be granted permission to cross the street as a pedestrian. It's not, you don't have that kind of a default right, which the automobiles do. And I think a lot of people say, but I'm out of here, man. This is just too dangerous.
I think we should have the motorists get out and push the button so that they can go across the street.
I like that.
Yeah.
It is a great point. Certainly something a lot of cities are looking at. A number of places the cities now have policies where in certain denser, higher pedestrian volume parts of the city, there's a prohibition from push button recall, that they require every signal to run through the pedestrian phase every cycle.
Right. In downtown, there are some intersections that are, auto recall, is that the buzzword?
Mm-hmm.
Not many though.
Yeah.
So would that be something that goes into a plan to talk to the signal engineers and work on how we change that?
Yeah, and actually part of the work of the TSP update is to make updates to the pedestrian crossing policy, and so that that looks in part at how to introduce new pedestrian crossing facilities, but also can speak to operations of existing signals as well.
I'll throw in there factors that you believe prevent people from walking and cycling. I would say weather is a major factor. It's not very pleasant to bike in the rain. Walking is not as big a deal. You can put on some protective gear and do fine with that. But inclement weather, I think, is a major factor. At least from maybe October through about April, May. We have so much wet weather here.
I don't know. Have you been to Copenhagen?
I'm not.
Leah. No bad weather, only bad clothes.
Right.
I wanted to say something about the idea of in as much as transportation is part of a greater whole, that, I understand we're looking at this individually, but it has to be part of a greater whole. And the idea of making it more safe, and the idea of placemaking, grid versus arterial. I think those are all the things that make people feel safe and give them a place to go. I think they even have done studies about that. It's like, it has to be easy, it has to be safe, you have to have a place to go. And so I think all of those things are important in a fuller consideration.
Great. Carson, did you have your hand up?
I want to address something what Leah said, that she had several workers that initially either rode their bikes or walked. And that's this affordability in the city.
Excuse me for interrupting. This is Jan. Commissioner Hardy, I'm having a hard time hearing you, which will mean we're going to have a hard time picking that up on the recording. Do you mind trying again?
Can you hear me now?
Not really.
Oh, okay.
All right, we'll get back to you. Carson, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I was just gonna say you guys all have wonderful points, and I'm kind of gonna build off what Teresa said. Was like accessibility of both having like a bike and then as well as like long form transportation such as a vehicle can be difficult as well.
Great, thank you. Let's take two more and then I want to move on to some other sections.
I think one of the big things that's deferring people from biking to downtown is the lack of safe biking. Like you were mentioning earlier, the Evergreen Highway, the old Evergreen Highway, they've done a lot of upgrades to that and made it much more pleasant to walk along. But now the road's a lot more narrow and it's not nearly as safe, I think, to bike on. So when we're looking at that map previously, I think what we need to think about is, how do you make better, safer bike lanes to be more encouraging to people to bike?
Great. Now we hear from Eduardo and Leah. If you have another comment, you can wrap up.
Yes, thank you, Thomas. Commissioner Ramos here for the record. Yeah, just the lack, I think, of complete neighborhoods. I'm lucky enough to live like a mile and a half from multiple grocery stores, so that encourages me to walk, to bike. But I don't think just the way that Vancouver neighborhoods are designed, that's reality for a lot of people, especially in the eastern part of the city. And you know, we talk a lot about downtown, but I think when we are in this commission, we need to consider those of us that live in, or those that live in the eastern part of the city. And then I would also mention obstacles. So things like vegetation overgrown on sidewalks, cans, you know, trash collection can be a big thing, obstacle, and just also cars getting up on the sidewalk and parking. And then I guess just having protected bike lanes. I live in Northeast Hazeldale. We have a lot of bike lanes, but if you're a beginner, you probably don't feel comfortable going down 78th where people are going like 50 or 60 miles per hour. So,
Right.
Yeah, and I think that ties in with what others have said about connectivity.
Great. All great points. Thank you.
Are we going to give Teresa another try?
You hear me now?
I can hear you. You're kind of faint, but.
All right, I'll get closer.
Yes.
One is affordability. We have a tax exemption that's geared towards density and not affordability. So in the downtown, we're looking at density. And then what do we do with people who can't afford to, who really don't want to drive a car because they really can't afford it? And yet we're moving them out of certain areas because we're not creating affordable housing. So I think this is broader than just the Transportation Committee. I think it has to do with the Planning Commission and the City Council and what we're looking at for zoning and tax exemptions and things, which we really have no control over as a Transportation and Mobility Commission.
I always say the best transportation plan is a land use plan. So I think you're absolutely right. There's a lot of important influence from how we plan our land uses.
Yes.
So you're on mute there, Teresa.
If we're going to address land use, we're going to have to address the issue of affordability with density and not sort of make it separate if we're looking at transportation.
Fill up those empty office buildings.
Yeah. I do want to be clear that we're developing a transportation plan. It's obviously part of, you know, it influences and relates to your comp plan, which is your land use planning document. Why don't we keep moving here since we're having great discussion, but have a few more things to talk about too. Steph, do you want to jump in and talk about transit?
Sure, thanks. First, a quick time check. So I saw that you guys had other things on your agenda and it's 5:24. How much time should we try to leave at the end for your other agenda items?
Thank you. I was actually just addressing that with the city. Jennifer, do you have a time that we need to cut this off for citizen communication? I'm not aware of how many people are signed up for this evening.
We have 2 people signed up. Is that correct, Jan?
Yeah, we just had a third one during the meeting sign up. So we have 3 people slated to share.
Okay. So yeah, we should probably try to wrap up in the next 15 minutes if that's possible.
Okay. Yep.
Thank
All
you.
right. So this is a map showing the transit network, and CTran is the primary provider for Clark County and the city. And so there's a series of routes. There's the blue lines are the local routes, and then the purple line is the Vine, which started back in 2017. And then the yellow routes are your express routes heading into downtown Portland. And there's also regional service that goes out to the airport. If you go next. And so we like to get a sense of where people are using the transit system today. So each of these bubbles represents average daily boardings. So the bigger the bubble, the more the people, and the gradation as well. So the darker the color, the more the people. And so there's a lot of boarding activity downtown at the Transit Center at 99th and at Delta Park, and also at Vancouver Mall and Fisher's Landing. So those are clearly the big ridership locations. And when you look at the spread of dots along the corridors, fourth plane, which is where the vine runs, you can see there's a lot of dots along that corridor. So there's a lot of boardings at many different places along that route. And you can also see that Mill Plain stands out as a corridor with many dots. And so the Mill Plain is going to be the next vine corridor. And so you can sort of see visually how that makes sense because of the high amount of ridership.
Yes.
So next. So we wanted to do some initial looking at the impacts of COVID. And this ties a lot into our equity analysis as well. So we really wanted to understand, even during the stay-at-home orders, who still needs to take transit, either to get to their essential job or to get to all of their services. And so the purple represents the routes that actually had the highest ridership loss during COVID. So on average, C-Tran daily ridership went down 43% during stay-at-home. And the purple lines are sort of where you might expect. So there are those routes going into downtown Portland that probably connect a lot of the jobs that had gone on hiatus. So what's interesting is the turquoise lines. So those are routes where the loss in ridership was less than the average. So it's places where people are still riding the bus. And so this is comparing June 2019 to June 2020. So the stay-at-home order, I believe, was still in effect for Clark County at that time, or had just recently been lifted. And so some of the routes, many of them are local routes that did not lose a lot of ridership, include like 78th Street, Fruit Valley, Salmon Creek. And what's interesting is Route 47, which serves Battleground, actually had a ridership increase. The ridership on this route was not among the highest in general before COVID. So it wasn't that big of a change in terms of the absolute number, but it's still quite interesting to see that ridership on this line went up. And so what we're doing now, and the kind of beige polygons was our first draft of this, is looking at aligning this over equity areas. And I know this came up earlier in the discussion. We had taken a first look at equity locations based on demographics. And then we also are now applying another methodology that looks specifically at economic vulnerability. So it's taking more of the income and those other factors into play. And we're also looking at places where English is not the first language. And so throughout this whole project, we really want to take this equity focused and start to see, okay, where are people taking transit during, in this example, during the stay-at-home order? And there's a high economic vulnerability where we would really probably, hopefully use this as a form of prioritizing projects later on in this project. So
Stuff. I think Commissioner Ramos had his hand up, and then
yeah.
Commissioner
Thank
Herman.
you, Thomas, and thank you, Stephanie. With this map, would you be able to add Route 60, which runs from downtown to Delta Park, that connects to the MAX station? I'd be interested to see that comparison, because when I was a student, that fare was more affordable, Route 60, versus now being a full-time employee. I would ride 105 or 199 to the Hazeldale Transit Center. So I don't know, I'd be interested to see that comparison where we have maybe more low income ridership on Route 60 versus these express routes with higher fares.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the reason it's not on here is because this just shows the top 10 routes that had the highest ridership loss. So we do have that data though, we can look at that.
I think Commissioner Herman's got his hand up there.
So Stephanie, in the previous map, you showed Mill Plain with a high amount of ridership, but it's not shown here. Would that then suggest that there was no change to the Mill Plain route?
Yeah, it's probably around the average. So 43% was the average. So we mapped, if it was above average or kind of below average. So no line doesn't means the route was still running, but it's probably around that average loss.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I think generally what we're seeing in the transit industry during COVID is that, like, commuter routes that are serving office centers, like your express routes to downtown, lost most of their ridership. a lot of routes maybe lost, a significant percent of their ridership. And then, routes that serve hospitals, Amazon distribution sites, those types of routes are the routes that, have often, in many cases, maintained a higher percentage of ridership. Leah?
I was just curious, I meant to ask this even before the meeting, when I got the slide. I didn't know, did C-Tran change the whatever that's called, the headway with any of these routes, or did they keep, was every same number of buses schedules as opposed to 2019? I didn't know if they had changed things when ridership went down right after the pandemic began.
Yeah, I think they went to a weekend schedule.
Because it seems to me
during
that
the
that would
weekday.
impact the number of people that were taking the bus, because I know when I had a route in front of my house and they moved it to every hour, I could no longer take the bus because that's just not feasible.
Mhm. That's a good point. Yeah.
That is a good point. That's been one of my biggest heartburns about public transportation, is that it's not easy to do it in a less densely populated area. You go to downtown New York or Chicago or Philadelphia or Boston, their density is so high that public transportation is much more economically feasible there. Here, we don't have the density that they have in larger cities. And, like the Mill Plain thing as an example, the buses run so infrequently. And I think I mentioned this in our last meeting. I've had employees before that just, it would take them an hour to do something that would take 10, 15 minutes in a car, sometimes longer.
And that,
So I would point out that Mill Plain is every 15 minutes.
yeah, and the nice thing is, if you can get to a point where you don't have to look at the schedule constantly, it'll make you more likely to take the bus.
Yes,
Mhm.
totally agree.
So a couple questions here. And so this project is for the city of Vancouver. And so we don't have direct influence over things like the schedule. However, we do have some influence over things like stop infrastructure, crossings at the bus stop. So thinking from it from a city perspective, what are some of the strengths and weaknesses of the transit service and infrastructure from the infrastructure side, so the stops, the stations, transit centers?
I think we answered a couple of those. Yes. Just
Is there Herman?
I think one of the Councilor Commissioner Reyes said it earlier, with Chicago and New York and the big city transit services, a transit line is associated with the street, so you know where you're going. With the C-Tran routes, I don't know where my endpoint is and the route that it takes to get me to that endpoint. I think that's intimidating for a rider.
It is.
Does having a service like the Vine that is unique and branded and a little bit more prominent help with that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's associated with fourth plane corridor. You're gonna get on and get off on fourth plane. But routes that take you all over the county, it's not necessarily direct. And so if I were to ride from downtown Vancouver to Hazeldale, I would get nervous if I start to take a detour and start to go east-west when I'm supposed to go north-south.
Call that destination stress.
I'll offer one. Typically a bus rider or mass transit is going to be get off the bus and then walk. But there are the people that have their bicycles so they can get a larger range. And very often I see a lot of the bus stops that do not intersect anything that looks like a reasonable bicycle infrastructure. So by having that, you really have decreased the range of that mass transit user.
and there's something we can directly impact, right, as a city.
Yeah, yeah.
I have a question. We have no direct input over the types of vehicles that are our buses because that's C-Tran. But if we have less ridership with COVID and more people being at home, are they then reducing the number of times the bus goes down a street because the bus is not full? Is it possible to have a smaller, more electrified bus system that can operate more frequently because it is carrying fewer passengers? I know that's not our decisions.
Right. And these are valid points of something good for us to think about. Stephanie, we're looking at keeping track of time here. Do you have any final comments or things that you'd like to discuss here before we turn it over to citizen communication?
No, I think we talked some about roadway items. I guess, Tom, do you want to flip through if there's anything major to?
Yeah, I mean, we had another section here on sort of street operations and traffic. If we don't have time, you know, we can you guys can kind of take a look at this stuff and feel free to send Jennifer comments too.
Yeah, I guess while we have you, the only last thing, if you want to flip to the outreach section.
Yep.
So we do have a project website and an online open house. So it's an interactive survey. So you scroll through, there's information about each of the types of transportation, somewhat similar. You'll see some of those same materials that we showed you today. And then there's a survey question for each of the forms of transportation. So we're trying to get as many responses as we can, knowing we can't do in-person outreach. So I can put it in the chat, although I think we're not supposed to use the chat, but I would love for your assistance in publicizing the online open house, and I would love for you to take it yourselves. So if there's a way we can,
Already have.
Jennifer, maybe can send it to you. You got it? All right.
Yeah, I have already taken it.
Okay. That would be great because, you know, it's hard to get the word out with everything being virtual, but we want to try to get as many responses as we can.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Stephanie, Thomas. Very, very informational.
Great. Appreciate all your comments.
Thank you. At this time, looking at the agenda, we would like to move this on to our citizen communication. I have a little document I'd like to read here prior to opening it up to the public. Jan, are you working on bringing them in as our panelists? Thank you. So all public testimony must be registered on the form online on our website. Attendees are required to conduct themselves in a courteous and respectful manner. When called on, please state your full name and your address. Make your points clearly and avoid repeating any that may have already been discussed. Each speaker will be limited to 3 minutes. We cannot share that time with other speakers. All comments must be directed to the commission as a whole, not towards individual members of the commission, city staff, or other attendees, please. The commission is not required to respond to any subject matter addressed during the public comments portion or to answer any questions or polls posed by an attendee, and speakers will not be given the opportunity to make rebuttals to other speakers' comments in this forum. With that said, I'll let you open it up. Jan, please, to the first participant.
Certainly. So what I'm going to remind you all is I will call your name and I will promote you to a panelist. I'm going to ask that when I do that, you turn your video, your camera on so that we can see you. And as Chair Payne has already said, make sure you state your name and your address. You'll be given 3 minutes. And at the 2-minute and 30-second mark, I'll just kind of say 30 seconds left so you kind of understand where you are in terms of your 3 minutes. So I'm going to start with Chris Thobaben. I'm sorry if I didn't pronounce your name correctly. I'm going to promote you to panelist now. And let's see. Looks like there you are. I see you, Chris. So go ahead.
Excellent. Am I able to share screen or no?
No.
Unfortunately, no. Okay, well, I'll submit this for record later on. Good evening. My name is Chris Bobbin. I live at 13801 Northwest 20th Court in Vancouver, Washington. The reason I'm trying to talk today is about the rapid electrification and automation of the mobility and transportation considerations you guys are making. I run a company called Marengo Solutions Corporation. We make autonomous solutions principally for the government, DoD, more expeditionary and more rugged, but related to. So I know for a fact that this technology is here. You know, the beyond the obvious, right? You know, moving people around is important. You guys have talked about this. I'm trying not to be too redundant from the superb brief that was presented, but you know, 60% of these trips are 0 to 5 miles. 25% of these trips are 5 to 15 miles. If you look about the reason for this electrification of transportation, it's principally in terms of access, right? Everybody has access to electricity by one way or another. We have an electrified community. We have the production out of electricity, and in terms of electric vehicles, well arms into a kilowatt hour typical gas vehicles. So, and if you think about lapping a football field, a gas vehicle gets kilowatt hour 3 laps, an electric vehicle gets 17 laps, and one of the little e-scooters they ride around get 333 laps. So just on the simple economies of electricity, this is benefit for everybody. Then we talk about the community access and how that benefits everybody, senior mobility, people with special needs, the vision impaired. You mentioned all the final mile considerations with people not wanting to get on transit and the willingness to adopt transit as, you know, one of the other obstacles. So what we find with point-to-point using autonomous systems is that you gain access to our archaic suburban cul-de-sac design that we've already built ourselves into or are not going to build ourselves out of anytime soon. So when we consider this future state, it has to consider something that is realistic in terms of adoption. And I think that autonomous systems that are electrified are ready for adoption now. We know for a fact that if we pursue an infrastructure-based solution, we work with the Autonomy Institute out of Texas as an example. There are billions of dollars available to our community if we pass even the smallest bond measure and commit to this full all in. We cannot do, and I will say this, we cannot do trials or proofs of concept. Those will not be funded, period. Even if we fund it ourselves, what they will commit to, and I say this in the infrastructure investment side, is that they will
30
invest
seconds. 30
in
seconds.
our community if we commit to autonomy and if we commit to the infrastructure necessary to do this, because data is the utility and data infrastructure will enable autonomy. So again, I encourage you guys, please reach out to me. I'm available online. I'm available in person. We need to lean as far forward on autonomy now. There is no future state for that does not include autonomous vehicles or the data infrastructure for broadband and autonomy support.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
Okay, I'm going to transfer you back to an attendee.
Thank you, Chris.
Thanks, guys.
And the next person that we have up is Peter Fells. Peter, I'm going to advance you as a panelist. Did I not do that? Try again.
There we go.
There we go. Okay.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Are you ready for me?
Yes,
Hi.
go ahead.
Okay. First of all, I'm Peter Fells. I live at 5121 Northwest Franklin, which is the northwest neighborhood in Vancouver. I sent you all a long letter, and I believe it was distributed. I'm not going to read that, I just want to emphasize some points. First of all, in the presentation you got, the first one of the early questions was, why does transportation matter? And I want to point out that transportation matters because it affects global warming. And this is something that we really need to consider, and I'm asking you to consider in all that you do. I appreciate Daria's questions. She had a couple questions about global warming and climate, and I think it's important that you take climate impact into consideration in all your transportation planning. We should be looking at reducing fossil fuel-based motor vehicle use and increasing public transportation, bike and pedestrian uses. And we should be looking at increasing density. Several of those things were raised by you as commissioners. Also, I ask that even though I realize you're not doing overall planning, part of the transportation planning requires you looking comprehensively at the planning going on in the city. We need to consider how transportation and mobility plans impact and are impacted by planned developments such as all the large ones that are planned for East Vancouver right now. Another thing I'd ask you to do is, in recommendations, is to ask the city council to stop approval of any development which wants to vest to current standards for transportation planning. There was one at last night's city council meeting that asked for vesting on the number of trips. We need to stop vesting until the city has adopted its new standards, which will be consistent with their to be completed climate strategies. And then lastly, I think a major thing that needs to be addressed is the greenhouse gas emissions from air travel and intercity travel.
30 seconds.
Thank you. To and from the Portland metro area, Battleground, and other towns in Clark and Cowlitz counties. I made a number of suggestions in my letter to you, and as the slides showed, a substantial portion of transportation is from Vancouver to other places, and we need to be looking at how to reduce that travel or make it less impactful on the climate. Thank you all for the work that you do.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Peter.
Okay, our last citizen comment is from Monica Zazueta. I don't know if I pronounced that correctly. Monica, I'm going to promote you to panelist. Right.
Okay, can you all hear me?
Yes.
All right, awesome. It's Monica Zazueta. No worries on that. No worries.
Thank you.
So hi, my name is Monica Zazueta. I live at 3607 F Street. It's right behind Safeway on Main Street. One of the questions that was presented earlier was factors that prevent people from walking or cycling. Well, I work over at the Aging and Disabilities Building up in Hazeldale, over in the Hazeldale Avenue road. And going to work, I actually had a situation recently where my cars aren't working and I had to get picked up by a bike and ride the pigs home. Well, I work at night as a janitor, and so I have to go down that windy road in night with no street lights, or the Highway 99 where you have to take the big stretch of road over the freeway. And that's pretty scary. So that's one of the reasons, is just scared. And then also it's just too far. The weather is another thing that was said too. With the weather, it's just freezing. It's so cold. And so that was just my individual story on what I would have to go through to get to work and to and from work, and how scary it would be for me. I'm a big activist for the climate, for the planet. And so I urge you to please listen to Peter. He is a good friend, and I consider him a good friend, and he's so smart. And so I really do recommend listening to his words. Also, 15-minute cities. Bringing back the neighborhood school and making food and basic necessities available locally, and have a third place in a community. A third place is a gathering space where you can meet a friend at a private business, public park, or plaza or library, and just have those places so we can just, you know, converse and be a community. And then have enough people and house enough people and all kinds of people. Make sure that it's affordable. Make sure that we're like, there's one person that's earlier, the empty buildings downtown. I mean, that could be housing. There's so many places that could be housing.
30 seconds.
And make it affordable. And then
30
also,
seconds.
Businesses need to be in walking distance, and it presents a possibility for businesses, small and large, to step in and offer their own incentives. By way of leadership, urban planners can encourage. Yes, thank you. Urban planners can encourage corporations to offer telecommunicating options, subsidized transit passes, and eventually more, move their headquarters closer to families. So basically just being able to walk to these places, knowledge exchange, work, education, nutrition, health, shopping, recreation, community engagement.
Monica.
And in the end, sorry about this, in the end, if our needs are met closer to home, we will be happier, more willing to protect our communities.
I believe it's trying to catch up, so I don't think she's actually talking.
Yes. Yes.
Monica, thank you
Yes.
so much. We passed the 3-minute mark.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. Do you want to?
No, not sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you, Monica. Is that it for our panelists tonight, Jan?
That is it.
All right. Rolling back over to our attendance, I'd like to thank all the city community for your input, your communication. We did have some letters that were sent in. Those will be added on to our minutes for the evening, as is customary. At this time, we'll roll back to review the attendance tonight. I do believe that all the commissioners have shown up except for Commissioner Frayer. And as bylaws exist, that will be an unexcused absence. I don't have anything further. Does the city or any of the other commissioners have anything that they'd like to bring up in the few remaining moments we have?
Can I just say real quick, Mike, that Chuck Frayer, I think we've talked about the reason why he's out. So he is he should be excused from, because he's let me know the reason why he's out.
Okay, thank you. Someone else has?
Yeah.
Mario?
So I am wondering if we got shortchanged a little bit with this presentation. There were some really important things that were discussed, and I think we should consider inviting them back to complete the presentation. They didn't really get to the things with cars and trucks moving in our system, and parking is another big deal that I think another one of our beloved commissioners mentioned as well. So I don't know if that's feasible or not, but I mean, I'm going to go through the slides, but I think there's some important discussions that we should have about that.
I agree with Maureen. I think that's a very good idea. Let's invite him back.
I agree as well. There should be more discussion.
Yeah.
It's my understanding as Commissioner Jennifer, and you can answer this, as there will be more updates to the transportation system plan on future monthly meetings. Will they be involved specifically? Is that something that we wish to pursue?
Yeah, so Tom and Stephanie will be doing future presentations, but given that we did run out of time tonight, we can bring them back and have them finish the presentation. I did want to let everyone know that unfortunately, I will need to be out of the office unexpectedly starting January 18th. And it's anticipated that I'll be out for at least 3 weeks. I could be out longer than that. And like I've shared with the TMC, I think in the past, we lost one of our transportation planner positions last year. So Ann and I are the only two transportation planners for the city. And so with me being out, that leaves a pretty big hole. And she already has a full work program, projects that have pretty significant deadlines that need to be met. And so we're going to have to, unfortunately, cancel the February 2nd meeting and hope that we can have the March meeting. So I originally, based on the work plan that we had, or that I had shared with you, we were going to have a presentation by Ryan Laposa at the February meeting to kind of talk about the overview of kind of like streets and operations within Public Works. And then we were going to talk about the West Side Bike Mobility Project. But given that we'll have to cancel that February 2nd meeting, I wanted to dedicate most, if not all, of the March meeting to the West Side Bike Mobility Project, because we are going to start going out and having communication with the public about the project implementation for that. That'll be coming up this summer in conjunction with the pavement project. So we're actually going to go to some neighborhood association meetings in January and February. So I really wanted to bring that before all of you, because that's another project similar to McLaughlin that's been going on for quite a few years. It's gone through a variety of iterations and is scheduled to be implemented this year with the paving project. And so I wanted to get that in front of you as quickly as possible. But we will be sending out a memo to City Council, I believe next week. Before that, our first public outreach that we're going to have with the Neighborhood Association on January 19th. And so we can send that memo out to you as well. It'll have a lot of kind of background and overview on the project and then what the next steps are with the project. So it's kind of, I think, up to you if you want to make all of the March meeting for West Side, or maybe we could have Tom and Stephanie come back, finish their presentation, and then we could start the conversation of West Side. And if we can get through it all at that meeting, that's great. If not, we could carry that into the April meeting. But there is going to be a lot of community conversation about the West Side project. And so again, I just wanted to try to get that in front of you as soon as possible.
Is it an option at all to have a 30-minute longer meeting, or?
Thank you.
Yes, that.
In the meeting time, please.
Yeah, if that's something that you're interested in, we can definitely do 2.5 hours. It seems like we need it based on the last meeting, or, since this is our 3rd meeting, but yeah, it definitely seems like we need it. So that's up for all of you to decide. I know that's a lot to ask of you, but yeah, we can definitely do that.
I think we need to do that because there's important things that we're talking about here, and they need to have their time for that. So yeah, I'd highly recommend that we expand the meeting. I have no problem going 3 hours if we need 3 hours. I mean, but this is, we got to make up a little bit. I mean, we're losing 2 hours in February. So by extending it 30 minutes, how is it that we're going to make up for that?
Well, for the record, I'm going to be calling in from vacation on the March meeting, so let's not go too far here. I'll make a motion for an extra half an hour here, but let's not push it. No. I'd like to refer that actually to council. Do we have to vote on that to extend our March 2nd meeting to 2.5 hours, David? Okay.
Yeah, no, Chair, the length of your meeting is totally up to you. That's a function of how this body wishes to proceed.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm on board for 30 minutes more. I don't think I can be in the cold basement for more than 2.5 hours. So.
Matt, go ahead.
Well, the onboarding session.
I'll lend you a pair of my wool socks.
I've got my heated vest on right now.
Go ahead, Matt.
Will the onboarding session on January 19th still occur?
Thank you. I forgot to mention that. So yeah, we will, because Kevin has been doing such a great job. I hope you think the same too, of facilitating those meetings. I don't necessarily need to be there, but Anna and Jan will be there, and then Kevin will be facilitating that. So yeah, please plan on the 19th onboarding session. Thank you.
And how do I view the last one that I had to miss?
So I'll get that up, before Jan will do that, and we'll send you a YouTube link because that's really the best way to get it up. So we can send that to you so you can watch it.
'Cause I'd like to watch it before the next one.
Okay.
So, Eduardo, did you have something real quick?
Yeah, I was just going to ask about the onboarding session too. And then when we have presentations, I don't know if we could have a better structure going into it, Chairman. I was under the assumption that we would get to moments where we would all comment. And so I was taking notes as the presentation was happening, and then other commissioners started jumping in. So I'd just like to be prepared if that's going to be the structure of the presentations, or if we're going to have more allotted times where we're commenting to be able to get through the presentation. So just clarification on that, Mr. Chairman. And then just other business, I wasn't sure if we needed to vote formally on allowing the written communication into the meeting minutes. We did that last time, so I just was making sure that we were complying there.
You know, I was looking for a clarification on that, on the bylaws during the meeting too. I could probably refer that to David as well, if that needs to be voted on.
Yeah, yes, thank you, Chair. I mean, if somebody wants to make a motion to accept all the written communication received as part of the official record, that can be seconded and then voted on, which would be the easiest way to do it.
I move to accept the written communication into the official record.
Seconded.
I'm sorry, please identify who made that motion.
This is Commissioner McKenzie.
Thank you. Anyone second?
Seconded by Commissioner Ruggles.
Thank you. So we, anybody opposed? Any comments? Can we vote on that, Jan?
Sure, we can. Commissioner Hardy,
Yes, aye.
Commissioner Herman,
Yes.
Commissioner Jackson,
Yes.
Commissioner Payne,
Yes.
Commissioner Rea,
Yes.
Commissioner Ramos,
Yes.
Commissioner Valenta,
Yes.
Commissioner Williams,
Yes.
Commissioner Ruggles,
Yes.
Commissioner McKenzie.
Yes.
Thank you. The communication will be added onto the minutes. It was voted in. I would like to I didn't see anybody with an objection to extending our next meeting for half an hour. Jennifer, if you could please write that up on the agenda, or however we need to do on the schedule. And to address your concerns, Eduardo, tonight there were no times on the agenda. I will look to have those added on in the future so that we can kind of keep track of a little bit more on the presentations and our interactions with the speakers and have time for everybody to get their concerns out.
Yeah,
Okay.
I would appreciate that, Mr. Chairman. It just felt like we were jockeying for comments in there.
Yeah, and that was my mistake. I didn't get the time slots on the agenda. So that was my responsibility. So I'll make sure that we continue to do that moving forward because it seemed really helpful at the last meeting.
Well, if no one has any other business.
I do actually, a quick thing, Chairman. It's just a small thing with regards to the minutes from last time. And I could be wrong. I thought that there was a mistake, so David Galasian is our lawyer, but I thought it said Steve in some of the minutes. Steve. Did anyone else notice that? So we only have one David Galasian. Anyway, so I don't know if that's incorrect. It just needs to be corrected.
Well, I will comment that to the extent if it does say Steve, yes, that should be corrected.
Yes.
Oh, by golly, it does, doesn't it? Okay, we will, anyone like to make a motion that we amend the minutes to correct attorney name to David?
I move that we correct our attorney's name to who he is, which is David Galasian, and strike Steve.
William, second.
Thank you. Jan, will you please take a vote on that?
Chair Hardy, Commissioner Hardy,
Aye.
Commissioner Herman,
Aye.
Commissioner Jackson,
Yes.
Commissioner McKenzie,
Yes.
Commissioner Payne,
Yes.
Commissioner Rea,
Yes.
Commissioner Ramos,
Yes.
Commissioner Valenta.
Yes.
All right, David, did you have a comment prior to finalizing this vote?
Yes, thank you, Chair. If you'll indulge me for just a couple of minutes, I wanted to talk about communications with in and between the commissioners, generally speaking. There may be times where, as commissioners, you are known to the public and you're approached by members of the public who wish to communicate something to the commission as a body, and they wish to do that through you, whoever you may be on the commission. My advice would be direct them to the commission staff, who is in charge of receiving communications that'll be sent to the commission as a body. If something is given to you and the person wanders off, you are certainly encouraged then to just pass that on to staff, and staff can bring that to the commission in terms of contacting the chair. If it's something that's relevant, it can be distributed to the body as a whole. If it's something that's just somebody wanted to say to the commission and it's been received, the chair doesn't need to authorize it to be distributed to every member. But staff is the appropriate vehicle through which that can happen. I don't think we've dealt with that too much yet, but just sort of to get out in front of that, just to make sure that everybody knows if somebody wants to get something before the commission, encourage them to go through staff, or if they give it to you, just go to staff directly. The second point that I wanted to make is that I wanted to emphasize for everybody who's a part of this body that right now, of course, everything's being on Zoom and being online, everything's being recorded. And I think so far everyone has done an excellent job in how they have comported themselves, how they've articulated their concerns. But I will note that being a commission member is a pretty important responsibility when it comes to how what you say is perceived later on. And I will just reference the Supreme Court case of the Masterpiece Cake decision from June of 2018, which is still relatively recent. And it was a decision where a Colorado Civil Rights Commission had determined that a bakery was in violation of Colorado civil rights laws for refusing to bake a cake for a same-sex couple. When this went to the US Supreme Court, one of the things that the court did was analyze very closely and very particularly the comments made by the members of that commission, of that Civil Rights Commission in Colorado. And they parsed it very closely, and I think perhaps much more closely than the commissioners may have realized at the time they made these comments. I think all the comments were made in the spirit of being open and trying to garner support for a number of different things, but it does leave oneself open. If you look at it in a vacuum, when it's printed on a page, something you may say that may seem, flippant or joking at one time, when it's in black and white and printed on a piece of paper in a court transcript, may seem very different. So I would just urge you, you don't, as I've mentioned a couple times, this body doesn't really get involved in quasi-judicial proceedings. So there's not really much of a worry that you will be in this kind of position. But I was representing a planning commission about 9 months after this decision came out, and the judge before whom I was arguing pointed to comments made by members of the planning commission, which at the time when I had heard them made, I didn't think anything of them, but reading them in a transcript, the judge pointed to the Masterpiece Cake decision and said, I have to look at what this person said and see if that has a negative impact on the decision ultimately made by that body. So I will just, this is not meant as a scare tactic. This isn't meant to tell you to clam up if you're not sure about what you're saying, but just understand that what you say is being recorded. What you say can be requested by any member of the community or any member of the public, whether they're a part of the community or not. and that what you say does have an impact. So I know that one of the goals of this body is to do our jobs and have fun doing it. I think that's great, and I think we should. I think that's an important thing to do. But I would be remiss if I did not remind you that everything you say is being written down, being recorded. So to that extent, you are part of a public body doing a public function, and what you say can and sometimes will be held against you. So with that, happy caveat, I will send you off. I think everyone's done a great job so far. I just wanted to make sure that everyone understands this is all being recorded and it's going to be there for posterity for forever. So we're all on the same page. We all know that.
Well, thank you, David. May I just clarify the first point that you made? Is that in lieu of, or can we also just direct people to making public comments?
Yes. And thank you for that question. You certainly can and are encouraged to also direct people to make comments publicly during the public comment portion of meetings. That's probably always a good first suggestion to make to people, is to say, share your comments during our meeting. But if somebody does try to pass something on to you to say, hey, you're part of the commission, give this to the commission, that's how you would proceed. But yeah, that's obviously a very good point. Tell them to come to the meeting first and speak their mind there.
Thank you. Okay, but I have to ask this other thing too, because I am a little spooked. So I understand that it's more about that you're relating to flippant remarks or remarks that can be misconstrued or seen in some ways divisive, but that doesn't relate to, for example, I understand that we're all working together and that we're working with all of these disparate considerations in a very deliberate, respectful way. However, that does it preclude the fact that, for example, when I was interviewed for this position by City Council, I come from a position of an equity lens, an understanding of systemic racism, a belief in climate change. So my perspective is informed by science and these principles. And so when I'm asking questions like what I did tonight, that's still appropriate. Is that correct?
And Chair, if I can respond?
Please.
Yeah, Commissioner, I think that is absolutely right, and that's absolutely appropriate. I think one of the things that brought this to mind was perhaps a meeting that we had prior to this one where there was some engagement back and forth, and I think some of the comments may have been not as circumspect as they could have been. I think the comments that I've heard from you, especially this evening and previously, have all been fine. But I would just let people know it's fine to disagree. We want a level of healthy debate and back and forth during this commission. But certainly keep in mind that the public is watching what you folks do and how you do it. So comport yourselves likewise, if that makes sense.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you for that valuable counsel. I've actually been thinking along the lines of the first comment that you made early on, that every conversation that we have could end up on the front page of the newspaper someday. So use your words carefully. So with that said, I will go ahead and finalize the vote that we have all agreed to call you David instead of Steve.
Thank you, Chair.
With that, I will move to adjourn our meeting for the evening. We will see everybody back here on March 4th for 2.5 hours. Is that correct?
But first, January 19th, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Onboarding on the January 19th, correct.
Bye, everybody. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Thank you.
2021.
Y'all take care.
Bye-bye.
You're muted.
I think that went all right.
I think so. I'm stopping recording and I'll receive a notification when the cloud recording is ready, is what it says.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, sounds good. I'll be here for a few minutes still, so I'll go ahead and log on to your account and see if it happens to download it. But I got